when I talk to our customers, and this is a primary part of what I do now, I don't have like a patch. I'm not an AE or something like that. I get called by the AE or an SE or somebody who has a customer who's giving them a lot of security questions, or they have run into trouble. Someone called me today and said, oh no, the VP of HR left and we have reason to believe that they extracted data before they left, employee data. So now we need to know, did they do that? How and what can we do? And what should we have done to prevent it? So I get called into one-off problems like that, but a lot of what I do is actually go out and meet with our customers and help them proactively develop a strategy. And so we talk a lot about shared responsibility. Salesforce does a ton to protect data all the time, 24/7. But our customers have to do some intelligent things too. And some of that is free or included at least in your licenses, like your access controls, your sharing model, field level security, basically to make sure that your users have the right permissions that they need without over permissioning them. And some of our customers elect to add on additional products like Shield, which is a huge part of what I cover with them. I don't know why that's animated. All right, I'm just gonna show this, and you know what it says already, but I am part of our product council, so I meet with the product team all the time, and I give them field feedback, and they give me roadmap feedback. So I probably will say something. I'll try to tell you if it's roadmap and not GA, but obviously make purchasing decisions based off of what's in the product today. All right, so lots of reasons to be proud to work at Salesforce. We were just talking about Trailhead as being top among them, but trusted security is our number one value. It always has been, and it's been that way before I started. I think that this is an amazing tenet to who we are as a company. We really can't run our business without customers that trust us to keep their data safe, so we have to make sure that we uphold these really high standards all the time. But I love that I can go out and sit down with our customers and have these conversations and feel really confident that we're doing so. One thing I talk about often is that our customers bought Salesforce for the platform in a lot of cases. They want to build these really amazing apps that are trusted, that are compliant. We hear all the time about new policies that we need to be aware of, but it's really challenging. You need to have transparency, you need to make sure you have the right security measures in place, and we want to make sure that we're protecting our stakeholders' privacy as well. And we also know that there are these emerging data privacy requirements. Some of them have been around a while. We've all heard of HIPAA, for example. GDPR has been around for over a year now. CCPA just launched this year. It hasn't even started accumulating penalties, but you'll see it this summer. It'll happen. And there's more coming. So we have to think about how we're going to build that into everything that we design from an app standpoint as well. Salesforce takes care of a lot of this for our customers. The first two bubbles that you see here represent the controls that we are delivering all the time without you having to do anything, configure anything. You're always taking advantage of this. Some of that is the security within our data centers, which I could do an entire hour just on that. Some of it's our backup and disaster recovery and data replication services, encryption in transit, the pen testing and continuous threat detection, and also between the auditing and the vulnerability assessments that are being done between third parties and our customers and internally, we are always tested. So we have to be 100% to the standard, above the standard every day. We can't have a bad day. Then at the application layer, these are the controls that all of you who are admins and devs also really should be familiar with this, but you'd be amazed how many times I sit down in a conference room and the team doesn't really have a good handle on this, and the person I talked to today with the issue did not. Some of these application controls involve making sure that you have the right mechanisms or the required mechanisms for authentication, like using identity management, solution, or like single sign-on, password policies, multi-factor authentication. Those are all going to be really important. Some of it is also making sure that you have the right sharing model. As I mentioned earlier, make sure your users have access to what they need to do their job, but don't give them everything. If they don't work cases, they don't need to see cases. If they don't manage credit card numbers, they shouldn't see a credit card number. So it's a combination of the sharing rules, field level security. Those are all really super important, and I spend a lot of time coaching our customers on that. So when we talk about that journey of making sure that we're building apps with the right controls in mind, I like to make sure that you're thinking about a few main points. One of them is data classification. Like, what is the data that you're going to store in Salesforce? What is it? Why do you have it? How are you going to use it? Those are all really important to know. Also, knowing your users. So who logs into Salesforce? What do they need to have access to? Making sure that you have a really well-defined role hierarchy and that you understand what your profiles are and what permissions you're giving to people is really important. Secure authentication so that you're sure you have the right users logging in all the time. That least privilege access model, I've mentioned that a few times. This is your first line of defense. You don't want people to have access to more than what they need. Monitoring user behavior is really important for understanding your org, as well as making sure that you don't have over-permissioned users behaving in ways that they shouldn't. And then real-time prevention. So probably the most common question I get is the one I got today. Something happened, how can I look back? But really your better approach is to prevent it. So making sure that you have what you need to enforce that. So if I 5 best practices. Number 1 for me is this new data classification. It's pretty new. It's only been around for a year, maybe a little bit less than a year. And this is partly in response to these data privacy laws that are emerging and the ones that we know will come. We need to really understand what type of data do we have. We need to be able to identify it in Salesforce so that we have the right governance associated to it. And also, I'm not showing this, but we have other new objects or metadata that apply to these data classification strategies like the individual object and consent preferences. But this one I think is something that we can really work with, and I'll show you a quick demo of how you can use this with Shield anyway. The next best practice is field level security. Everyone should know about this. It seems really common sense to me. I cannot believe how many times I find out that there's sensitive information and everybody in the org can view it. People ask me all the time about encrypting data, and I do think that there is a reason to encrypt data for some use cases, but I actually think for the vast majority of the use cases, what you want to be doing is limiting visibility to data so that you don't expose things to users that don't need to see it. All right, transaction security is part of Shield. That's an add-on, so that's not included with your licenses. This is what I'm going to demo for you today. This is hands down my favorite security product. It allows you to put real-time prevention in place. And what you can think about here is I have certain combinations of sharing rules and profile permissions that might mean that I have access to contacts and they're public so I can see all contacts, and my profile allows me to export data, so therefore I can export all contacts. And that may not be appropriate. Maybe it's appropriate for me to export my own contacts or contacts related to my accounts. Here with transaction security, you can dial it in to become more conditional about what you're going to allow. So we might say, yeah, this person can download data out of a report, but not more than 1,000 rows at a time. Or going back to that data classification, they can run reports, but I don't want them to put sensitive data on that report. Or I want to have a high assurance session and make sure that users put a token before they can export data. So I'll talk about that a little bit more later. The other one, also an add-on, this is actually pretty near and dear to my heart because I worked on the launch of this, and it's a very highly requested product. Since I started teaching ALM when I was in CSG, how many acronyms can I get into a sentence? ALM and CSG, this was something that our customers have been asking for. And the reason why that this is a risky proposition that we've been looking for solutions for is that you have a few different types of sandboxes that you use. You've got Dev and Dev Pro sandboxes, which copy down just your org's metadata, your custom fields, your record types, your page layouts. But you have those partial and full copy sandboxes that copy down actual production data. Well, Then you combine that with stuff I've seen in the consulting space, and I'm sure a lot of people in this room can share stories. But what happens is you open up those sandboxes sometimes to a wider array of users than what you would see in prod. It could be developers who don't normally access your production environment. It could be third parties. It could be offshore workers. It could even just be training and UAT that are your internal employees who access production anyway, but they have expanded super user permissions in that sandbox. And or if you are my bank and you're training somebody, you shouldn't be looking at my record, right? You should only be looking at me if you're actually servicing me as a customer. So adding data masking to your sandboxes, it takes a lot of worry away, because what it does is it takes that production data and either pseudonymizes it so that you get a name that looks like a name, or you can anonymize so that name turns into some kind of string of gibberish, or delete the data entirely. But now you have production quality data in that sandbox in the right volumes that you need, in the right format that you need, so that you can do that testing and training, but without actually exposing real PII. My vertical for the year is communications, media, and technology. So if you think about it, I deal with a lot of movie companies, news, stuff like that. They have real celebrity data in there. If you imagine you've got, even just the admin thinks that they have a special loophole here and they go searching up individuals' phone numbers, right? So this is a great way to protect that. You can set it up once in your production world, and then it'll copy down to your sandboxes, and then you can deploy it over and over again. So it's a set it up once and run it when you need it situation, so it saves a lot of time. So that's a really important one for building data privacy in and being compliant. That could get you in trouble. And then encryption, as I mentioned, there is a reason to consider encrypting. I don't think most data needs to be encrypted, but I think you do need to consider it when you have really sensitive, personally identifiable information. I have had this conversation with businesses that have celebrity data, world leaders' passport information, but even a state agency that have the whereabouts of foster children. They want to make sure that they have every security and technical measure applied so that they feel really comfortable that they are protecting that information. With our platform encryption, also an add-on, you can decide what you want to encrypt, and you can think about that as you're thinking about your data classification strategy. We have a couple of different flavors of encryption, deterministic and probabilistic. One of them, probabilistic, I don't know why that's happening. Probabilistic gives you a very similar string every single time. It's the strongest form of encryption, but it is the most difficult to work with when you have encrypted data at the database layer. Whereas deterministic encryption gives you a little bit more flexibility, but you have a slightly less random scheme there. And then we have a new background sync that allows you to sync your data. If you rotate your keys and you want to be able to reharmonize data to your new key, we now made that accessible as well. All right, I know I said 5, I'm gonna give you more. Multi-factor authentication, we actually just had a really cool talk from a security expert that was talking about the future of passwords, and that passwords are you should start to see less reliance on passwords and more on tokens and passwordless logins and things like that. So I would definitely encourage you, if you haven't added multi-factor authentication, to do so. You'll notice a lot of your apps outside of Salesforce are asking you to do that as well. And then org health is really helpful. If you haven't seen this, it's in your setup menu. This is part of your licenses. You can just go to setup and type in health check, and it will give you that baseline information as to where you are from a compliance standpoint. If you are meeting the standards for your highest risk settings, your medium risk, and your low risk settings. All right, I don't really have anything else to share. I had that trailhead up there. Enjoy.